I'm very happy to have the privilege to reach out to those who are working in the Ukraine. I'm very sorry about your troubles, and I hope that you will be able to get some practical tools from this lecture that you'll be able to apply in the field. I have a lot of experience of intervention after terror incidents and sudden unexpected death. So we're going to go from there. I don't know exactly the conditions that you have to work with where you are, so I'm going to give a general overview. First of all, we're going to talk about the breaking bad news. Breaking bad news is always hard for the receiver of the bad news. The reason that it's important to know how to break news well is because you can make the news so bad that it causes an additional trauma in the way that you do it. If it is sold in an insensitive way, in an abrupt way, or in a brutal way, it makes the news even worse. So during the next little while, we are going to be talking about what bad news is, what is the aim of breaking bad news well, and you'll receive the tools for breaking the news. The tools that you're going to get are going to be both verbal and affective, that is to say body language and words, both of those things in communication. So let's look at this first slide. You can see this picture here. This is a drawing made by Kate Kalowitz, and it's called Killed in Action. Now, look at this picture for a moment and think about what you see here. First of all, how many children are in the picture? There are 4. There's one baby on the hands of the eldest girl that you can see. Look at the faces of the children. Look at what you see there, which is like fear and panic and confusion. Where is the mother in this picture? No, she's not in the middle. Where is she? She's not with her children. She's somewhere else. Look at her body language. Look at what's happening with her face. She's not with her children. Why? Because she's a bad mother? No, because she's grieving for what she's just been told, the bad news, okay? We don't know who in this picture has been killed. You know, we don't know who she's received the bad news about, if it's about a brother or a sister or a parent or a husband or a partner, we don't know. But what we do know is if it is the father, these children, these 4 children are now effectively parentless, okay? They are orphans from their father and their mother. The father who was killed apparently, and the mother who is in her grief and cannot be available to them. That is what happens when bad news is given, okay? Any news, what is bad news actually? It's any news that makes a significant life change for the worse. Any information that adversely and seriously affects an individual's view of their own future. Okay, so what could this be? This could be a chronic illness. This could be a disability, being informed about a new disability. This could be a life-threatening illness or injury. This could be death, or this could be loss of home, loss of country. All of these things are life-changing, life-altering things, and they're all about bad news, even if afterwards the life of the person can be improved. At that moment, it is bad news. So why is it important to break bad news well? What we want to do is we want to enhance the ability, the adaptation, psychosocial adaptation of the person who's receiving the bad news. This is partly derived from being respected by someone who is speaking to you, someone who is significant, which is the bearer of the bad news, okay? You want to do, you want to give the bad news with a lot of honor, as much honor as you can. I understand that there may be terrible time constraints in the middle of what's going on in the Ukraine, but even with the time constraints, you can do this in a way that is very honorable to the people that you are speaking to. So could we move to slide 2, please? Okay, specifically what we're trying to do is, first of all, provide the information in a meaningful way so that they can understand it. Now, the first thing you need to remember here is that you want to take it down to the easiest level of understanding. You don't want to complicate it by using any complicated terms, any medical terms, any psychological terms. You want to use the easiest terms. For example, you wouldn't say to someone whose loved one has suffered a heart attack, you wouldn't say myocardial infarct. You would say heart attack because it's more clear, you know. So you want to make it in the easiest language possible. It doesn't matter what the level of intelligence or knowledge the person has. You want to make it as clear and as simple as possible. So that's to provide it into in a meaningful way. You may have to take into account the level of understanding of the person. You actually do have to take that into account all the time. In where you are, we're talking about language, we're talking about culture, we're talking about what they've been through so far, how much they can take in of what you're actually speaking about. And so you take into account the level of understanding. You're also talking about people that you're giving the bad news to that already have some kind of cognitive difficulty. That is to say, they have some level of understanding, for example, mental retardation or mental disability, that they can't get the news in the same way that someone else can, or autism or something like that. So that also has to be taken into consideration. You want to respect the person's personal integrity. You want to respect them as a person when you're saying this to them. You're not just reading off a page and dismissing the person. You want to give them respect. And you want mostly not to increase the distress unnecessarily. Now, the distress is going to be bad anyway, but you don't want to make it worse than it has to be, okay? So the best model is based on complete respect for the strength and the individuality of people. People usually can adapt even to horrible, terrible news. And so you come towards the person with an expectation, with an understanding that they will be strong, even if their immediate reaction is very, very bad, like screaming or crying or all of those things. They're fine. They're fine. This is a release valve for the emotions, and it's fine. It's not a problem. Okay. So you are to value them regardless of their situation, of their current situation. They will be hurt by the news. There is no way that you can make bad news into good news. Okay. People need and deserve to get the truth, because then they can then they can respond, and they can start to organize themselves, can start to get the message. You have to also respect, it's very important to also respect their emotional reaction as having a function. The emotional reaction has a function. It is a release valve, you know, and it allows them, and you want to allow them to express the emotion. Don't say things like everything's going to be all right and it's going to be, you know, if you have a place to bring the person that is going to keep them safe, you can inform them about that. If you do not make promises that you can't keep. Okay. So the model here is mutual participation. Okay. You are the bringer of the bad news, but you did not cause the bad news. The tendency of people that bring bad news is to feel guilty about bringing the news, like I'm changing this person's life. You are not changing the person's life. The news is changing the person's life. This is not your fault. You know, you're bringing the news, and so you're the medical or the emergency worker or the person that's reporting on what's going on right now to the person. And you want to respect the patients in all aspects of his or her life, because they will have a better idea about what they can handle than you will. Okay. So you say it. I'll give you very clear, detailed instructions, tools for this in a moment. So in order to use this partnership effectively, there needs to be good communication, mutual respect, empathy, openness, humility, not pridefulness, humility, and negotiation, okay? Not listening or not understanding the views of the person that you're talking to are no part of this model, okay? The reason that it's so important to break bad news well is that the way that the news is broken can affect the patient's understanding of what's going on at all, it's comprehension, the satisfaction with how it was presented, the level of hopefulness, and the psychological adjustment. All of these things are important to take into consideration. It seems like it's just getting a hit in the face, but there's more going on here than is apparent when this is happening. The idea that receiving bad news the receipt of the bad news causes psychological harm is unsubstantiated. We have no studies that say that this is what causes the psychological harm, receiving bad news. The bad news itself, of course, does, but the receipt of the bad news, we want to make it as positive as possible. Giving bad news is never easy. It's never comfortable, but if it's done well, the receiver of the news should feel adequately supported and cared for at the same time that you're telling the news. I want to give you a story of a colleague of mine. His wife was pregnant with their first child when she was killed in a car accident. And they called him up and told him to get to the hospital quickly because there has been a car accident. And he, of course, almost got into several car accidents on his way to the hospital and got to the hospital and ran around looking for his wife. And someone came up to him and said, your wife is dead. We need her kidneys for someone else. That was how the news was broken. Very, very disrespectfully, you know. That is bad news broken poorly. Okay, for example. Now, in his case, a year later, at the anniversary of his wife's death, he went to the graveyard, and that same doctor that broke the news to him that day, who he hadn't seen for the past year, came to the grave and said, I'm so sorry for what I did. It's a pity it took him a year to say that, but this is breaking bad news poorly. So how does it feel? Let's talk about the person who's receiving the bad news. How does it feel to receive really bad news? Those of you who have received bad news personally, I'm talking about in the Ukraine, probably most of you have received at least some of the bad news personally about your city or about your area or about perhaps your family. And when you receive very bad news, it feels like getting a kick in the face or a kick in the stomach. It feels very, very physical. So what would your first reaction be if you got a kick in the face or the stomach? We're going to use the face for this purpose because the face is all you can see on this video. So if you get kicked in the face, your first reaction is usually to protect your face so that you won't get another hit. Okay. So when you get bad news, what is the place on the body that takes the hit when you get the bad news? I'm going to answer according to what people usually say. I want you to be really practical when you're thinking about what is the place that receives the bad news. It's not the heart. It's not the head. It's words. It comes in through the ears. So what happens is that sometimes you see someone doing this, covering up the ears, but whether or not they're covering up the ears, what happens is a psychological shutdown. So everything that is said after the bad news is not heard. The person cannot hear anything that's said after the bad news. So you have to remember this, because if you have some more important information to give this person, where they should go, what they should do, or whatever, they won't hear this. So if you really want to make sure they know this information, you're going to have to write it down. Okay. Because right after bad news is received, you have an ability to absorb additional information of about 0. Okay. So you can't hear anything else. So what do we want to do? I'm going to speak just a little bit about some more body language. You saw the body language in the first picture that we had on the front slide, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what your body language needs to be. One of the things we need is to make eye contact with the person. Now, this is not easy to do, especially the first time you break bad news, or maybe you've already been breaking bad news in the field and now it's another time that you need to break bad news. But this is very, very important, because when you make eye contact with the person, you can also see what their response is. If you're looking away or looking down at a paper, or your vision is to the side, you will miss what's going on with them, what their physical response is, and you want to see this, okay? So what happens is this: if I was to give you this lecture and not look at you at all the whole time, just look at a piece of paper, you would assume that that you don't exist for me, and you would be correct. Okay. Our eye contact with another person reminds them that they're alive, that they exist for you. Okay. So it's very important to keep this eye contact. Now, the other thing about eye contact is height, eye height. If you look down at someone, it gives a different impression if you're standing and they're sitting than it does if you look at them straight on. You want to be able to look at them straight on, so you want to make sure you're at the same level that they are. Now, if there is an available place to sit, even if it's on a rock, there's available place to sit and you can both sit down, that would be fine. Many times people that are receiving bad news do not want to sit down because they know something's happening and they're afraid and they want to stand up. So you remain standing. That is to say, you remain at equal eye level as much as is possible when you give the bad news. Okay. Now, the eye contact is very important. Now, let's go to the next slide, please. The preparation. First of all, who should the news be given to? You know, you need to understand who's supposed to be informed. You're not going to inform a 5-year-old kid about the parents if there is another parent available. The child is going to need to be informed also, but you want to inform the adults first. Okay, for example, you need to have as much information as possible about the situation, which sometimes, especially in emergencies, is almost nothing, but you need to have as much information as possible. You have to decide ahead of time in what order you're going to convey the information. Don't do that. You know, you're like, you need to know how you're going to say the information. It's going to be very, very short. So it's not going to be very confusing. I'll tell you how to do that in a minute. You have to decide what language, what words you're going to use, what terminology you're going to use, and no professional jargon of any kind, only clear words. Okay. And it's a very good idea. You know, when I'm working with doctors in hospitals, I make them practice and practice and practice in front of a mirror until they can say it well. Okay. If you don't have time for that, I understand that when you're in this situation that the Ukraine is in at the moment, but if you can practice it in front of a mirror, do it. It will help you. Pay attention to what you're saying, pay attention to what you're doing, pay attention to what your face is doing while this is happening. Okay, so again, I'm going to repeat that when we receive bad news, we shut down. So there's a problem. There's a problem. On a practical level, this means we have 2 sentences until shutdown. 2 sentences, that's all, okay? So the first sentence has to be a warning shot. What's a warning shot? A warning shot lets you know that something bad is coming. Okay. Unfortunately, I'm using the word shot when you're in the middle of your situation, but this is what it is. It feels like that also. The warning shot would be something like one sentence. It'll be something like, it has to be clear and concise. It will tell the listener that something bad is coming. What can be an example? I'm sorry, but I have bad news for you. That's a warning shot. Or the test results were not what we were hoping for, or something like that. They will see also from your face that bad news is coming, but you want to say that. Then what do you do after that? You are silent for a moment. what will you see happening with the other person? And we're keeping in mind, you're looking at them in the eyes. You will see their eyes jumping around. Okay, they're trying to organize themselves. Sometimes you will see them adjust their body like a boxer ready to receive a hit. Okay, like, okay, I know something bad's coming. I'm not sure what it is. I'm getting ready. You will see them adjust the body and the eyes will move around. Do not speak until their eyes return to you. Okay, they're not there for you yet. You wait until the eyes return to you. They may say what, they may respond somehow. The second sentence is the news itself. It has to be short and to the point. For example, Joseph died today, or we did our best, but we weren't able to save so-and-so's life, if you're emergency workers that we're trying to save. Okay, or I'm sorry, but your husband has died in this crash. One sentence, and then silence again, silence. Give them the chance to get what they've just been told. This one sentence may be followed by crying or screaming or silence or anything. If the silence is going on, don't assume that it's silent inside. It's not silent inside. Inside the person, after receiving bad news, is the most rushing thoughts and sentences that you can imagine. Anything you say to them while you don't have their eyes, while they're silent, is just like between two radio stations. It's just disturbing. It doesn't help them. Wait until you have their eyes and stay silent during this time. Okay. Now, okay. So wait for their eyes to return to you. Okay. Now, I'll show you. I'll give you an example. If I died and my husband was the one that you were telling that I died, you would have to say this: Asaf, I have terrible news. That's the warning shot. You pause, you wait till the eyes come back to you, and then you say, Lynn died today. Okay. Now you say this again and again until you can say it out loud and clearly. How loud? Loud enough that they can hear it. Okay. If you try to say this and it takes fewer than 5 times of practice, then you're not doing it right. It takes practice. Okay. So how do we do it in the meeting itself? We've got another slide that says, how do we do it? Okay. Yeah. So before I get to the slide, I'm going to continue talking about something else. First of all, you find as much privacy as possible. I don't know if you are walking around with pagers or cell phones or things like this. These need to be turned off when this is happening, when you're giving the bad news. It doesn't mean it's going to take a long time. It just means respect for the person that you're talking to. Okay. So first of all, you ensure as much privacy as possible. If there's a room you can go to, terrific. If there's not a room, if there's a shielded space, also good. If that's not available, you could have 2 chairs or 2 facing a corner in a room with chairs if you can, or with seating, or with stones that are left facing the corner of the room. Gives us feeling of privacy. Okay. Behind a wall that's standing, that you might be able to, as long as the wall isn't shaky, don't endanger yourself, of course. If possible, if at all possible, try to have tissue with you. You're not going to bring a box like this probably into the field, but try to have pieces of tissue, pieces of cloth, something so the person can wipe their face if depending on how they respond. Okay. It's also very good. I don't know how possible this is, but it's also very good to have some kind of liquid that they could drink, because the thing that connects us fastest back with life is the gullet, is swallowing something. It reconnects us with our body a little bit. So you want to try to give them also something to drink after the bad news. So you make sure, you're trying to make sure a couple of things. As much privacy as possible, tissue if possible, water if possible, okay? And allow enough time to give the information and get the reaction, okay? So, and if there's any discussion, if it's possible. Now, this could take 5 minutes, it could take 10 minutes, it could take longer, not a lot longer. The other thing that's really important is to arrange for aftercare, okay? Why aftercare? You want to know what the person is planning to do right after the meeting with them, okay? This is a suicide watch, okay? Many people immediately after receiving bad news, even though they're not generally suicidal, may make an attempt. So you want to know what the plan is of the person right after they receive the news, okay? What do you plan to do right after the meeting? I'll go over that again. Now we're getting to this slide, which is about the meeting. Before you enter the meeting, before you go to meet with the person that you have to give the bad news to, before you meet this person, and I can't emphasize this enough, before you meet them, go and urinate. This sounds like a ridiculous idea. It's not a ridiculous idea. You can't be trying to hold your urine inside while you're trying to give bad news. Pee first, then go into the meeting, okay? It sounds like a ridiculous idea. It's really, really important. You don't want to interrupt the meeting for this, okay? So the meeting itself, introduce yourself so that in some faculty, I am the emergency worker here. I am the doctor. I am the policeman. I am the whatever, say something, introduce yourself to the person. If you can express and ask the person how they are, you can if you want, but you need to introduce yourself. I mean, we don't know. You have to keep in mind that when someone receives bad news from someone they don't know, this is how it feels. You're getting something you don't want to hear from someone you don't know. Why should you believe it? You know, so introduce yourself to, like, who are you? Why are you the one that's giving this bad news? You know, whatever. So you introduce yourself. Don't assume anything. Don't assume if the person is a professor, don't assume you could speak to them in a different language level than for a street cleaner. You cannot, not for bad news. Bad news, keep it simple, always. Don't assume anything. Be aware and responsive to the person all the time. That means you have to look at them. You have to keep eye contact. Otherwise, you can't do these things, okay? Now, what you want to do is you want to be gentle and slow verbally. Now, I'll give you an example of this. When I am giving you the lecture, you hear my voice and you hear my voice tone. If I'm breaking bad news, I break the news like this. I lower my voice, I speak quietly, and I speak clearly. The voice itself, in terms of body language, feels like support against the spine. This is why you speak this way. This is helpful. This is clear, okay? So that's how you speak when you're giving the bad news. You give, so you are, again, you see these points here. You introduce yourself, you don't assume anything, you be aware of and responsive to the person all the time. You be gentle and slow verbally, and then you give the warning shot. Short and to the point, okay? Then you wait for the eyes to come back to you. And then you give the bad news. One sentence, short and to the point. It's not easy to put bad news in one sentence. That's why the practice is important, okay? Then you wait for the response to the bad news. Now, silence is a way to be with the person. Allow the patient, the person, the individual that received the bad news, allow them to respond with silence or shock or confusion or lack of comprehension or distress or anger. Accept it without any argument or criticism. They might say, what did you say? And you may have to repeat that same sentence. Try to use the same words. Okay. If it's clear enough, you don't have to change the words. What did you say? What did you say? Yes, your husband has died. What did you say? Your husband has died. And you wait. When they say it again, you wait 3 heartbeats. What did you say? Your husband has died. Okay, like that. And then you want to find out what the initial concerns are of the person. Well, how am I going to get a hold of my daughter? How am I, these kinds of things. And then you respond to the ones that you can help with. Some of them you'll be able to help with. Some of them you'll have to move the patient on to someone else to help with them. Some of them you won't be able to do anything about, but you listen and you see if there's anything that you can help them with. And if there is, you do it. Okay. Accept the patient views as valid. Okay. Even if they are temporary, even if they seem ridiculous, even if whatever they say, just listen. You don't have to judge. This is not time to teach them. Remember, they're not absorbing anything else that you're saying. And then you have to find out what they heard from you. Like, did you understand what we said here now? And see if they know, do you have any questions? What can I help you with? Okay, much of what you say in this meeting will not be remembered, but I could tell you something else about this meeting of breaking bad news. I was teaching in one of the medical schools, and as one of the things about breaking bad news, we had doctors that had given bad news and patients that had received bad news. We had them meet in front of the students to talk about how it felt to receive the bad news and how it felt to give the bad news. And sometimes the bad news was 5-7 years old. It had happened a long time ago. And the patients remembered what the doctor wore, remembered what clothing they had on. So it's, this can be significant. It does, not every patient remembered that, but I'm just saying that you don't know what will hit who. Now, one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that, well, you know what, I'll go to the next slide. Don't overload the patient. Much of what is said in this meeting will not be remembered. Okay. Now, the next slide is how do you end the meeting? Don't act like you're running away to the next thing. You may feel like you need to run away to the next thing, but you're going to have to wait for a minute. And you summarize the information to check the understanding, which is like, do you have any questions? What can I help you with now? And then you have this really important question, which is, what are you going to do right now? The answer might be, I'm going to jump off a building. And that's when you need to do the suicide watch. Usually the person will give you the exact answer of what they intend to do right now. It's surprising how honest people can be in these situations, but then you know that you have to have follow-up. You can't leave this person by themselves if they are endangering themselves, okay? Then, if possible, let other people know what the reaction of this person was. If you're writing something down or something, so that people will understand what's going on. What are their major concerns? What do they plan to do after the meeting and things like this? Now, you will make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. It is not terrible to make a mistake. It is very terrible not to learn from your mistakes. So you can make mistakes and learn from them. Try, I know this is such a crazy situation right now, but try when you can to give some time to yourself to debrief, to have your own feelings with yourself or with a colleague or with your God or something, so that you can also take care of yourself. You can't afford not to take care of yourselves, because with each death that you announce, or with each loss you announce, or each serious issue that you announce, it will leave a little mark on you. It won't leave a huge mark. It feels huge now. It won't be huge, but it will leave some mark. And so you need to also take care of yourself. You need to help each other. Now, I would like to tell you something else that's very important to understand about breaking bad news. There is much talk today in the West. I don't know if it's with you, but there's much talk about body and soul, the difference between body and soul. Do you talk about that in the Ukraine or in Russia at all? Yeah. Okay. So there's much talk about that. There is no such thing as a separation between body and soul while we are on this planet. There is no such thing. The body and the soul are one while we're here. So everything that hits us emotionally, mentally, physically, psychologically, hits us also physically. Everything that hits us physically hits us also psychologically, mentally, spiritually, whatever you want. Okay. It's all one. We are one thing. We are not five things all separated. We're one. Okay. So why is this important? One of the things that happens is when you break bad news to someone that's standing because they don't want to sit down because they see something's coming and they want to stand up, you have to be ready to catch them. Because the news is like a hit, people fall over from this. And if there's nothing to catch them, they could get injured actually from the bad news. So you have to be like ready or with someone else that's ready to catch them, literally to catch them if they're standing, okay? It hits like that. People carry the grief in a specific place in their body even. You know, there is people that usually it's somewhere on the meridian that you feel the pain, which is, it feels like a pain in your chest or that you can't breathe or that you feel like you can't eat or you eat too much all the time because you're somehow trying to make up for it. But you carry this somewhere in your body, but it depends on the person where they're carrying it. Once I was asked one of the women that came to me for help, where on her body she carries her grief. She had lost an infant to an infant sleeping disorder, sudden infant death, crib death. And she said, in my right ear is where it really hurts me. And I'm like, why do you think that is? And she said, because on my shoulder, she would always gurgle in my right ear. And so that's where I carry it, you know, and everybody carries it in a different place. And it's fine. It's fine. I would be very happy to answer any questions. I want you to make sure you are aware that you help each other and you help yourselves. I just want to go over this very quickly again so that you don't forget. You're talking about before the meeting. This is taped. I hope you'll be able to get a tape of it. Before the meeting, you try to make sure that there's water available or tea or whatever you've got, that there's tissue available, that you pee before you go into the meeting, that you have a place to sit if possible, that you maintain eye level at this level, that you maintain eye contact, that you pay attention to the person, that you lower your voice an octave and you speak in a way that will support them, that you stay there, watch for their reaction and accept their reaction as part of the deal. And that's okay. And then in the meeting, we went over it again. You introduce yourself. You don't assume anything. You have to be aware of and responsive to the person all the time. You are gentle and low verbally, and you give a warning shot to the point, short and to the point. You wait for the response. Then the bad news, short and to the point. You have one sentence, and then you wait for the response. Then silence and pay attention to the person. And then find out what the patient's initial concerns are, accept the patient views as valid, and find out if there's anything that you can do, correct misconceptions if it's appropriate, okay, about the issue. When you finish in a calm way. Don't run off to the next thing. Anyway, you need some time between these things, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, so that you can recover yourself, okay? You summarize, check to make sure the patient understood, and please find out what the patient intends to do immediately after this meeting, okay, to be a suicide watch. Okay, then if you can, you note the information in another place so that people understand what has gone on. Be aware, help each other, help yourselves. You cannot do this indefinitely. all the time. It's really hard. Okay. And I would like to bless you to live every day of your life. And I would like to ask for questions. Okay.
Okay, so there are questions. The first one, actually, it's a 3-in-1. So, well, maybe I will read all of them, and then you will.
It's
answer one by
better to
one.
read. It's better to read one at a time. I've not got a terrific memory. So
Okay. Okay. So, are there any recommendations for a text support chat when a person learned about the loss at the time of a conversation with you and continues to correspond while you are working with when you are on the shift? So, any specific recommendations?
I don't have these. That is to say that the bad news is given by phone. Is that I didn't understand that.
There is support, a text support chat when people are corresponding through the phone, through the chat, not through the conversation. And they're receiving the bad news through this conversation or something else, if I understand correct.
Right. And then
So
they have the
how?
tech
And
support
they
for the
continue
chat
to, yes,
afterwards.
and then you have to continue, yeah.
Okay, so with body language, of course, when you're on the phone, it's a little different, but there is body language in your voice and the way that you speak to a person. Again, when you're doing the support for them, I don't know about the technical support, but when you're doing support, emotional support or psychological support, you would, again, use the lower voice. You wait until, and when they're talking, you have to make some kind of noises that show that you're still on the line listening to them, which would be like, yes, oh, like that kind of thing, quietly, not to interrupt them. It's very important not to interrupt them unless they are a danger to themselves or someone else, which requires intervention. But if use your voice, usually, this is not always the case, but usually questions are better than statements. So instead of like trying to teach somebody something or trying to, tell them everything is going to be whatever, you don't do that. You ask them questions. If they say, how can I go on? You say, how can you go on? And then they'll tell you how they can go on. And that's how they discover how they can go on. That's helpful. Okay. So you give them, because that isn't a real question. I mean, when someone says to someone that they don't know on the telephone, how can I go on? That's not really a question. That's like, I'm asking myself out loud. So you do that. If they ask another type of a question, like, how am I going to tell the children? Then you need more training and you need to get the answers to that. That's, children and death, it's a whole nother lecture. I think that I have one recorded in Russian, but I'm not sure, on YouTube. So yeah, you can check that out, but that just look under Lynne Halamish. You could probably write it in Russian and get a hold of that. There are a couple of Russians there, there are a couple of lectures there, including Breaking Bad News, by the way, and some other ones. But they were designed for physicians, so it's a little bit different. But the next question, Seema.
The next question. What is the task of a psychologist in a moment of shock and denial when a person is not ready to accept the reality and seek to put himself in danger, especially if children, they want to, for example, to leave a shelter to check with my mom why I'm here and mom is not, and things like that.
Right.
So how?
Well, that's exactly what we were talking about at the end of the meeting, finding out what the person wants to do afterwards. Now, if it's going to endanger them, you have to find a way to prevent that. Now, if you're on the telephone, I don't know how you can prevent that exactly, unless there's someone also on site. But you have to try very hard to prevent that. And you say, you are in danger. Please do not go outside. It is dangerous right now. You are going to have to wait. And again, you do this, you're in danger. Please do not go outside. It's too dangerous right now. And you say it like that, and make sure that the danger thing comes through as a warning. Okay. How you can, that they refuse to accept it. I just want to tell you something about accepting about death. It goes like this, particularly after a sudden, unexpected death, and even a sudden expected death, even if you're in an area where there's a lot of violence, particularly after sudden death, let's say, and also even after slower death, it takes approximately 3 months, 3 months to understand that the person is dead. You can say it, but you don't get it for 3 months. So there's like no way anybody on the ground is understanding what's going on until afterwards. You just don't get it. It's not possible to absorb this information, even if it is an old man dying in bed at home happily after a long life. So if you're talking about sudden, unexpected, violent death, there's no way they understand it. So you don't have to worry about making sure they understand it. They're not going to understand it. They just have to understand what steps they have to do to cope now with this current emergency trauma. Okay, does that answer the question? I hope.
Okay, I hope. Actually, the last question is basically more or less the same, but anyway, it's a continue. So what is the task? Basically, you explained it, to distract by talking or to be the person who give the words of reality. Okay, so you answered. Next one, what to do if while giving the bad news, you can't keep yourself and you are, as a presenter of the bad news, is crying.
Okay.
How can you?
Okay, this will happen. I mean, if you're living in this country that you're working in and that this is happening in this country, you will be crying sometimes. It's not terrible to cry. It actually, in some cases, I mean, I know of cases where an emergency ambulance worker was trying to revive somebody that died, a young man who died, and he was unable to revive him. And of course, you usually think that on television, everybody that you try to resuscitate resuscitates. So you think that you can resuscitate everybody, and in reality, you can't. So this young emergency worker was feeling like he had failed miserably, so he was crying. The parents of the person who died were there, and they said, our son's death even touched him, even though he didn't know that. Now, he probably wasn't crying because of that, but they took it that way. It's not a bad thing to cry. You want to try to avoid a situation where you're crying more than the person who received the news. And if you find that you're crying too much, take a step back, get some help from somebody else. There are a lot of people there that are doing these things, and see if you can get a talk or something to calm down a little bit. Usually when we cry, it's because that particular situation reminds us of someone we love that has either died or that is in danger or they could be in danger. And so that's usually where that's coming from. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question, how you will give in the bad news if it happens, if the patient death became a result of a medical failure, mistake, things like that.
Okay, look, this is a question. This is also a cultural question. What do they do in the hospitals? Do physicians own up to their mistakes, or do they not? There's a big move in the West to own up to the mistakes, to say when you make a mistake medically, because if you don't say it, someone else will make this mistake again. And so it's actually very good, but to admit this. But are you going to admit it to the colleagues? Are you going to admit it to the patient? You know, there's a lot of there are a lot of it's called iatrogenic. There's a lot of physician induced death. It just happens because when you're working in this field, there are mistakes that are made, of course. you have to decide in the framework of where you are, who you can tell that to. Sometimes you can go and really apologize to the patient. What happens, I can tell you what happens in the Western world, because I don't know what happens in Russia and the Ukraine, but I know that if the insurance companies for physicians were trying to figure out what makes people sue lawsuits. There's lawsuits all the time in the West. And so they were trying to figure out what makes the patient sue the doctor. And what they found out to their surprise was that it's not about the mistakes, even if it causes the death of a patient. It's about the lack of respect that the doctor shows to the patient. If the doctor shows respect to the patient, said, I'm terribly sorry, something went terribly wrong in this thing, and I'm really apologize. Usually the patient will not pursue it legally at all. So the insurance companies demanded from the medical schools to put in behavioral science training for doctors so that they wouldn't get so many lawsuits. So that explains something about that. But it's usually if you treat the person with a lot of respect, they're not going to they'll be hurt, of course, by things that went wrong. But okay, does that answer that question? Do you think, Seema? What do you think?
I think yes, at least we don't have any more. Usually people explain what they want. Any other question, colleagues? No.
Okay,
No. Okay, so there is no more questions, and yeah. So thank you very very much, Lynn.
you're most welcome.
And I hope it was helpful for you, colleagues, and you will use those recommendations. And
Amen.
yeah, Kat, you want to
So
give more any?
Thank you very much, Lynn. Thank you very much, Seema, for translation.
thank you.
Anna, and I hope we will use it less.
Yes, may
Yeah.
God be with you in this
Thank you.
difficult time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Seema.
Have a quite a nice day.
Amen.
Yeah, and take care of yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. So thanks a lot.